Are these doctors against the keto diet? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Westman Reacts. If you don't have my top 10 tips on how to start keto right, please look in the description below. Thanks for sending the videos to respond to and the comments as well. They're very helpful. This is a video from Talking with Docs. I think I've seen some of their videos before. It's two surgeons who are influencers as well as surgeons, and they talk about a wide range of things, including diet. And let's see what they have to say about the keto diet. I find that these things that they're talking about are pretty common among doctors these days.
Keto diet, ketogenic diet.
You know I don't love talking about diets. I don't think diets are the way to go, personally.
And I think generally you and I agree that a diet is not a good idea. You know, you need to be thoughtful about the way that you eat, the timing of what you eat, and the food that you eat, but restricting yourself to something very specific is not the best idea.
Well, the food matters. What you eat really matters. And thinking about that video I just did, a reaction, the interviewer asked, what would you tell yourself, 10 years ago? Or, it's a common question to teach yourself something that you've learned. I wish when I went to medical school that the teachers would get up at the beginning of the whole medical school and say, what you eat matters. What you put in your mouth, what you fuel yourself with, is one of the most important things for human health. And it never has been said that I'm aware of at any medical school. Please write down below if there is one. I'd like to congratulate the dean myself if you know of one. Most medical doctors come out of training without any knowledge about nutrition, and we end up being reactive in most cases. And so, like me, I had to learn after medical school and residency about programs that truly work. And I've been in organizations that teach doctors and non-doctors, but after their traditional training. So actually, it would be great if surgeons did talk about food, and if their point is that you don't want to be on a restrictive diet for weight loss, well, that diet really just means a routine or a ritual. And yes, you want to talk about food intake and what do you eat? What should you eat? We're made of protein. Protein comes first.
However, I'm going to talk about my grizzly bear diet. All right?
Okay.
You heard of carnivore and paleo. I got the grizzly bear diet.
Okay.
Stick around to the end.
Okay.
You stick around to the end, I'll tell you about it.
I'll be here. Okay, so the ketogenic diet, why did it even become a thing? It started back in 1921.
It goes way back. Okay?
Russell Wilder.
Over 100 years ago.
A guy that was treating intractable seizures, or seizures that they could not control in any other manner. So we didn't have the access to the medications that we have nowadays.
Well, so this is a common misconception. If you hear the term keto diet or ketogenic diet and you Wikipedia it or you Google it, you get taught that it started with Dr. Wilder and it was used for epilepsy. Well, that's one type of keto diet. Actually, the keto diet that I teach, and we've published papers now, in our language was low-carbohydrate ketogenic diet, that we specifically, we thought for hours about how we should talk about what we were studying. It's low-carbohydrate enough to be ketogenic. So LCKD or LCHF or low carb high fat, or these are all approaches that go back to the 1860s. And the first diet book that we know of was called the Banting Diet. It was in London, England, and sold for $1. I have a copy of it, well, a newer version of it. I don't have an actual copy from that time. But the pedigree, the history of the diet that I teach, which is now lumped in together with keto diets, ketogenic diets, and so there's a keto diet that's been used for diabetes reversal, for obesity and other metabolic issues that goes back even before Russell Wilder, one of the doctors popularizing the use of keto diets for epilepsy. So why is this different? And why is this important? Well, it tells me that these doctors really aren't fully informed about all of the science that has to do with diabetes and obesity treatment. It's a different type of treatment philosophically too. You can be much more relaxed if the consequence of you eating carbohydrates or going out of ketosis is that you'll gain a few pounds. That's the only consequence. If you eat some carbs, you go out of ketosis and you have a seizure, like you just saw, that you have to be very strict about the diet that you're eating. And so these are what you would call related, but not the same diets in terms of the history or in terms of the implementation. So don't worry that you have to be so strict about it, because no, if you're using it for diabetes and obesity, you're not going to have a seizure. That's the other kind of weird things that people have mentioned to me. So sorry, docs, this has a different history.
So what they did is they put these people on ultra low carbohydrate or no carbohydrate diets or a ketogenic diet, and this seems to help particularly kids that had intractable seizures control their seizure disorder, which was amazing.
For those of you that poo-poo Big Pharma, they came up with seizure medication, so we don't have to starve individuals who suffer with seizure disorders anymore to treat them, because now we can give them seizure medication.
Yes.
The upshot of that is I know Johns Hopkins researcher Eric Kossoff pretty well, and he's the lead investigator for the ketogenic diet for epilepsy now. They've done studies where they've modified the diet so that you're not quite as strict. In fact, I think he called it the modified Atkins diet for adult epilepsy. And the reason why diet still can be important in the epilepsy world is that these drugs commonly don't work. I mean, they might help a little bit. So I'm afraid pharma hasn't totally solved the problem of epilepsy, and the diet can still play an important role.
So there you go. So how did that transition into a diet that is very popular? A lot of books, a lot of experts on the internet, a lot of foods that say keto this, keto that. How did
I think as we moved through the decades of medicine, I think it was being used to treat diabetes as well.
Yeah.
This sort of starvation in type 1 diabetes was thought to help as well,
right,
to get people into a keto state, which is confusing because one of the complications of type 1 diabetes is going into diabetic ketoacidosis,
right,
which is a ketogenic state and a low pH in your blood, which can be fatal.
So this is complicated. So kind of the basic tenet of all of this is that our body's primary source of energy typically is glucose.
Right.
If you're a carb eater. So again, we're all taught as medical students that when you eat a meal, there's carbohydrates, there's proteins and fats, the blood sugar goes up and the insulin goes up, then that's a response to a normal meal. Well, normal doesn't always mean optimal. And so if you're a carb eater, you burn what you eat. So you're going to be mainly burning carbohydrates, but it doesn't have to be that way. But this is also kind of just a paradigm view. If everyone has eaten carbohydrates, there aren't many people who don't eat carbs. This is taught as being normal, but it's not necessarily optimal.
So glucose in its purest form is sugar, but it can be formed from more complex carbohydrates or from stores in our liver and our muscle called glycogen.
Right.
Once these are depleted, however, then our body can use fatty acids to convert to ketones. And this actually is preferentially used by our brains because our brains have an obligatory amount of energy that's required.
Right.
And it is ketones. So what happens though is that when our insulin levels go way, way down, so either because of starvation or because of a diet that is deficient in carbohydrate, this reduces our insulin level, increases something called glucagon, cortisol, a lot of other stimulatory catecholamines, and then this drives our body to start using fatty acids, which is a slightly less efficient way, but a way to access our fat stores that creates ketones.
Well, that's sort of the classic teaching, isn't it? But when you think about it, carrying energy in a molecule, if you want a lot of energy on that molecule, actually fat and fatty acids are a great source of delivering energy. Turns out our heart muscles and skeletal muscles will use fatty acids first, and then ketones, and then glucose in sort of a pecking order of what's available. So fatty acids is actually a much more efficient, kind of a tough word. It's delivering a lot of of energy in a compact source, which is in some cases what you want. If you're trying to lose weight, then you want to lose fat weight, and you want to be burning that fat that you have on your body. And that is one of the consequences of a keto diet, is that you're fat burning. And if you have extra fat weight on your body, you'll start burning it automatically. I mean, everyone becomes a fat burner, or everyone goes into nutritional ketosis if you don't eat for 2 to 3 days, because we all store fat on our bodies. It's a normal thing. The other thing that just went by on the video, it was a common misconception. If you've only heard of diabetic ketoacidosis in training, you're going to conflate, you're going to misunderstand the nutritional ketosis, this healthy fat burning state, and you're going to think that it really means diabetes ketoacidosis. That's not what it is. It's, in fact, the new term should be talked about at a recent meeting, EU, meaning normal, ketoemia, ketones in the blood, normal range of ketones in the blood. Probably take 20 years for that to become used as a normal term. But so once you become a fat burner, ketones substitute for where glucose used to be used in tissues and cells that can't use fatty acids. So fatty acids are a great source of energy, and our bodies love using fatty acids.
That's the process, isn't it?
It's a lot.
And I think in terms of using up your glycogen storage, that takes a few days
It does.
typically before you run out of your glycogen stores.
Yes.
And so the idea is we're trying to induce that state with
Yes.
a high intake of keto diet, basically, as opposed to taking in carbohydrates. What does, other than unappealing to me, what does a keto diet look like?
So keto diet is a little bit restrictive, like a lot of these diets that we've talked about. So 60 to 70% fat, which is a shift away from the last kind of 50 years, probably in a good way. 30% protein, 10% carbohydrate. And there are some keto diets even that are no carbohydrates. So we're talking in the range of 20 to 50 grams. And just to put it in perspective, like one medium-sized potato has like 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates. So we're talking like a really small amount of carbs for your entire day.
Okay, and so typically,
Yep.
and I noticed you didn't see any ultra-processed foods in that diet. So ultimately, the people who do embark on the keto
Yes.
diet do lose weight pretty fast,
Right.
and pretty successfully in the
Right.
in the short term.
Yes. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's more of because they're eliminating other stuff. Now you're not eating all the junk food, scientific term for all those other foods. Junk food, you've cut all that out.
Right, so you get rid of sugar, you get rid of refined carbohydrates, you typically get rid of ultra-processed food. However, you could have ultra-processed like turkey pepperoni stick or something like that that's processed, but it doesn't have any carbohydrate. Right. The other thing about these diets is when they are super restrictive, people typically don't overeat because you get bored of them. That's actually a good way to reduce overconsumption of food, is have a diet that's really boring.
Well, let me know down below if you're bored with a keto diet, or send it to Talking with Docs. It doesn't have to be boring, and it can be boring. In fact, that's one reason why I have people who come back to me and we talk about it. Sometimes people get in a rut. They start out eating a certain set of foods on a keto diet and they don't mix things up, so they just think that that's the only thing you can eat. So you want to have resources to help you do it for the longer period of time so you don't get bored with it. But I don't find that it's restrictive at all. What they don't understand, and most doctors don't understand unless they've done it themselves or they've read papers, is that the weight loss actually happens because you eat less. It's not because you're just eliminating certain foods. You're actually burning fat and eating less because your body is accessing its fat store, which is what you're trying to do when you're trying to lose fat weight off your body. And the emotional response to this is pretty common, and if your doctor is not supportive, or if they're giving you this kind of brush off, that it's usually, well, we'll find out why.
And so one of the main goals of this for recently is to lose weight. People are trying to lose weight. We have an obesity epidemic. People are like, what can I do, for heaven's sakes, to lose some weight? Just tell me.
Yeah, that's why people, and in addition, I think on eating the higher protein, higher fats,
Yes.
you feel full quicker.
Yes,
you're
you
not
do.
hungry all the time, whereas if you're going on the carb route, you're going to be hungry again, you're going to be hungry again. So that also
And this all relates
contributes.
back to hormones. So hormones like cholecystokinin and ghrelin, which is actually like a hunger hormone, as well as its impact on insulin. A lot of it comes back to insulin, and we're going to do some videos about this later on.
Okay, all right, so that's what the keto diet looks like.
Right.
That's the history of where this keto diet came from.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about, is it sustainable? Does it lead to sustained weight loss? And is it good for you?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Where's the evidence? Is there any evidence that there are any conditions or situations where this is a good idea?
There's always evidence.
There
There's
is.
always evidence on either side of things.
Right.
There's evidence, I mean, that I've seen, that I've reviewed, and I've reviewed some debates between cardiologists about, you
Yep.
know, heart disease and that. There is evidence to support rapid weight loss. Okay,
Yes.
there are some clinical trials that actually do show, look, yeah, you will lose weight quickly.
Yep. What about in the long term?
Now the problem is, like any diet, it's hard to adhere to a diet, which is one of the reasons I don't like diet, and I prefer a lifestyle change and an eating habit
Yep.
as opposed to a diet. But it's people don't adhere to it for very long.
Right.
Some of you do, I'm sure, but often
Leave a comment if you had an experience with keto.
Actually, in the randomized trials, and we contributed to the randomized trial body of knowledge on the keto diet, the adherence or the sustainability in the clinical studies was better for the low-carb diets. And they're correct that the selection, if you get into a study, you go through these hoops, and most people don't stay on diets when they're in a study, but you can. So if you learn how to do it, you join a social media group to help you learn how to do it, or a local support group, you can actually sustain this. It is sustainable. Really, any way of eating can be. You want to make sure you're getting great foods, not worrying about the fats, and not taking all these weird supplements that really aren't necessary. So what I teach is a method of keto diet that actually goes back to the 1860s. Remember, not the 1920s, ketogenic diet for epilepsy. The Banting diet in the 1860s, there was no electricity, there were no apps, there were no bougie oils and foods, no keto products. You can just do it with real food. So I don't think these doctors have personal experience with it, and maybe there are some quotes or comments below that they'll learn from.
Good or
Often
bad?
people will fall right off the keto bandwagon.
Agreed.
Okay, what about evidence for things like your lipid profile?
Okay, so unfortunately, typically it has a negative effect on your lipid profile.
I mean, I've read some, and I've seen that evidence, and I've also seen evidence that says it has a good effect on your lipid
This
profile.
is the trouble with all nutritional research, is that it's so hard to control exactly what people are eating, to properly document the amount of calories that they're getting from different sources, and to measure the outcomes. And that this is the plight of all nutritional research.
Yeah,
Or there's individual variability, so that it's good that you're finding different results because everyone's different. And or you have to start thinking in terms of the metabolic syndrome when you look at the blood. So when I look at the blood levels of the lipids or the cholesterol levels, I don't focus on the total and LDL cholesterol anymore. I look at the triglyceride and the HDL. It's just a different way to go about it. Like driving on the left-hand side of the road, you might not have learned how to do that. Of course, metabolic syndrome also includes an increased abdominal circumference, elevated blood glucose, but not necessarily to a diabetic level, elevated systolic blood pressure, but not necessarily to a treatable hypertension level. So metabolic syndrome has become the thing that we look at and treat. It's an obesity medicine sort of teaching, which is a subset of medicine. You can get a degree from the American Board of Obesity Medicine, so it's not like some fringe idea. But if you're in the old school, and even there was a recent paper I talked about that only used the LDL cholesterol as the outcome, that's just not sufficient. That's just not adequate in the year 2024.
On a very personal note,
Yep.
I found I was able to reduce my bad cholesterol and triglycerides by 20%.
Yes.
By changing my diet to very plant-based.
Yep.
And eliminating all sort of meats and fats as much as I could for like a year.
Remember, it's hard for anyone who does a plant-based diet to not mention eventually that they're doing a plant-based diet, even though this video is about the keto diet. So anyway, I think that's why he was the one who was always giving the frowny face and the eye rolling about the keto diet all along. That's pretty funny.
And then instead I went on medication and flipped back to a balanced diet.
And then he went on medication. Well, so that's one way to go about it, okay? A doctor might not even ask you about what you eat. They'll diagnose you with things, tell you to do things, put you on medicines and manage these things. Or you could come to a doctor like me who asks you what you eat and drink and might even probe a little bit about what you eat and drink. Is this what you do every day? Are the weekends different? And food is so important. I wish that in medical school the dean would get up and say, what you eat matters, and everything you're going to learn in medical school is based on what flows from the nutrition that you consume. Now there has to be some genetic teaching, of course, and some teaching about how drugs can influence the metabolism. And I'm afraid that's what's happening now, or has been happening for a long time, is that the scientists think that they need to prepare the doctors to understand what the drugs do. They don't necessarily focus on what diets do. And so that's one reason why doctors come out without much nutrition and diet knowledge.
But I think to your point though, if you reduce refined carbohydrates and sugars, you're probably going to drop your triglycerides that a lot of people don't get, just like by reducing alcohol, it does the same thing. So even though it's not specifically a keto thing, those things would become part of a keto diet and would have that same potential benefit.
Yeah, but you'd think eating a bunch of bacon
Yes.
wouldn't be good for you. That's traditionally what we've been thinking for the last few decades.
Right.
Now bacon's not good for you because of the processed nature of it, but I was talking about the fat content in it.
Sure, and I think too, it brings up a really good point, is that some of the potential consequences of a diet like this, whether it's keto or carnivore, something like that, may be longer term issues that you're not going to see in the short term. You could maybe change your blood work, you might lose some weight, you might feel better initially because of that elimination process.
Okay.
Well, then we get into the fear mongering of, well, we don't know what happens when. I remember doing our first study, it gave the results at 6 months, and someone asked, well, what happens at 6 months and a day? And I said, well, we didn't study. So then we did a year-long study, and well, what happens at a year and a day? And it was another doctor who coached me to kind of say, well, everything at a year looked fine. You know, so it didn't look like people were teetering on the edge of the cliff. Everything was looking fine. So the long-term studies, of course, would be nice to have, but short of that, we're following cohorts of people who are just eating this way and biomarkers, things like that. But the idea that you can't get started and reverse something like type 2 diabetes for worry about something down the road, that's just not rational.
But the long-term consequences are hard to measure.
Okay, so bonus, you're going to lose weight fast. Negative, you might not be able to stick to it, and there's some unknowns of what you're doing to your sort of lipid profile.
Yeah, one group certainly that has had benefit with this style of approach to eating is the diabetic population, the type 2 diabetic population.
People who live with diabetes.
Yes, people who live with diabetes, yes.
People who live with type 2 diabetes.
Yes, thank you.
You just have to say people live with before the disease now.
Yeah,
That's the
they don't have it. They're living with it.
Yeah, that's the new way we say it now.
I like it. Yeah, and the reason is it helps control your sugars better.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it works in that. And also, the weight loss associated with it is also going to help your diabetes as well.
Potentially could cure it.
You think so?
Yeah, if you lose enough weight, definitely you can reverse type 2 diabetes.
There you go.
Okay, any other conditions that you think it can be beneficial for?
No.
Polycystic ovary syndrome, fatty liver, heartburn, irritable bowel syndrome. Remember the seizures. So joint pains, interestingly, improve. So anyway, if you want to learn from surgeons who don't know much about a keto diet, this is great. But so what's interesting is doctors kind of feel compelled to know or give an opinion on everything. But these doctors are doing pretty well. And in fact, here at the end, they're saying that it can actually help folks with diabetes and obesity, despite the mud we had to slog through to the end here.
Okay.
Can you?
No, I mean, there's a lot of people positing that it may be beneficial for things like Alzheimer's, for mood disorders, for things like that. Again, the research is not totally conclusive, but certainly it's interesting and ongoing.
I did read that.
Yeah. One thing to note is that this is not something that has to be completely animal-based. You could be a vegetarian or a vegan, a plant-based eater and have a keto diet. It just depends on where you're getting your calories from. So more avocados or nuts and seeds and less complex carbohydrates.
Good luck with that.
Okay, so there's a summary of what keto is. It's worth considering for you if you're struggling with your weight or with diabetes. Talk to your doctor, obviously, before you make any drastic changes. If you like this video, please like and subscribe.
Grizzly bear diet.
Okay.
Here it is. I was in Vancouver at a grizzly bear sanctuary, and I saw the plaque that said their diet is 80% vegetables, berries, things that grow in the ground.
Sure.
And 20% of fish, meat. Well, the odd camper, I guess. But look at the grizzly bear. Big, powerful thing, lives a long time.
Mostly plants.
Just like me, grizzly bear.
Like grizzly bear because of the hair?
I meant the fierceness, but yeah, the hair, I guess. Grizzly bear diet. Think about it.
Now you know. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel.
And remember, you are in charge of your own health, and you're in charge of what you eat.
We'll see you next time.
Well, they are amusing. My understanding of the grizzly bear diet is that it changes by the season, and that in the summertime, when there are salmon that are plentiful, they basically eat the salmon. And then when they're trying to gain fat weight for hibernation, so these are bears that hibernate, they shift more to the berries and the carb-based foods because that's what gets turned into fat. So a good learning point, not the type of food necessarily, is that the carbs, the berries, actually turn into the fat for the hibernating bear. It's amazing about the bear, the physiology is very different than a human in the case that they don't actually urinate or defecate while they're sleeping, which is kind of amazing. If you're a typical human, you may need to get up in the middle of the night to take a pee. So especially if you're an older man, so we're not the same physiology. They can actually break down that nitrogen compound to a non-toxic form, which is fascinating. But anyway, the idea that eating is important is huge. The idea that you can eat lots of different ways and that it's healthy is well stated. And then they finally do say, yes, that there is, although somewhat begrudgingly, I'm afraid. I say this not just for these two doctors. This is pretty common among most doctors today. They're not going to necessarily be supportive. They may roll their eyes and tell you to do a plant-based diet because that's what they do or that's what the powers that be say. So we coach in our clinic based on the individual doctor's response, to say things like, well, just can we agree to disagree about the foods? My blood work looks great, doesn't it? Focus on that. Don't even bring up what you're eating. It's one strategy, or just say you're following a modified Mediterranean diet, and you may find the emotional response. Remember, it's not scientific response here. The emotional response is much better from your doctor. I hope that's helpful. Please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and if you don't have my top 10 tips on how to start keto the right way, please look in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.